We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Ches Amud Aleph and Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 58a. And the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing the Mishnah, which said that by hektish a shomer chinam doesn't swear, meaning to say a shomer chinam does not swear to exempt himself by saying it was stolen or lost or there was an accident. And it also said that a shomer sacher he doesn't pay. Rashi understood that to mean he doesn't pay for gneva via veda when we're talking about hektish. And so the Gemara now is asking from the Mishnah Mesechet Shkolim. The Mishnah Mesechet Shkolim is talking about a situation where a person sends his machatzis hashekel with a shliach. And so the Mishnah makes a distinction between whether or not the trumas halishka, whether or not the money was actually taken from the chamber yet or not. And so the Mishnah says if the money was taken from the chamber, so then nishboin legizbarin. So then when the shomer, when these people who are bringing the machatzis hashekel, their agents to deliver the machatzis hashekel, when they swear, they have to swear to the gizbar. That means to say that they have to swear to the treasurer of the Beis HaMikdash. Rashi explains, nishboin legizbarim shelo pashu behen. They have to take a shvua that they were not negligent. Right now the Gemara is assuming that we're talking about agents that are shomer chinam, and so this is a shomer chinam. He takes a shvua that he was not negligent. Shehein baalei hadin. The point over here is that the gizbar is the baal din. To mikevon shetarmu es halishka, because of the fact that at this point in time they already took the money from the chamber of the Beis HaMikdash. So once that happens, ein achrayis aveda al habaylim. The original owners, it doesn't matter if it got lost from their perspective. They are not responsible to make it up. Ela al hahektish. Rather, it's hektish that's the one that's going to take the loss, and that's why the oath has to be to hektish. The oath has to be to the gizbar. Kidamrinan lekamon. We're going to say this later on. Torman al ha'ovid, that they take when they take the money from the trumas halishka, when they take the money from the chamber of the Beis HaMikdash, even on stuff that was lost, they're taking with that in mind. Shehei chelek bekupos halalu, that should be whoever gave. There should be a portion. They should have a portion in these boxes. Lamisha shalach shiklo v'yavet. Even if somebody sent his shekel and it got lost, he is considered part of this machatzis hashekel. Ve'eno yodea achshav sha'avad. Even if he doesn't know right now that it was lost, again he's a part of it. And the Mishnah in Shkolim continues, V'im lav. Now, if not, and Rashi says, V'im lav shenoda lehem mikodim lachein. Let's say they found out before this. So shuv ein torman aleim, meaning to say they found out that it was lost or stolen before they actually took from the money from the trumas halishka. So they no longer will take from the trumas halishka on these individuals. Ela almanas sheyishluchu lehem acherim tachteim. Now the people who sent the machatzis hashekel, they're going to have to send another machatzis hashekel because theirs got lost. Lefigach b'nei ha'ir hein balei hadin shel shluchim. Therefore, the people of the city, since they're responsible, so the shluchim, the agents, when they take the shvua that they are not responsible, they're taking a shvua to the b'nei ha'ir, because the b'nei ha'ir want compensation from the shluchim, and the shluchim are exempting themselves by taking this shvua. And that's what the Mishnah continues, Nishboin livnei ha'ir. Again, if not, meaning if they didn't take the money yet from the chamber of the Beis HaMikdash, so then the oath that the shluchim they take it to the b'nei ha'ir, because again, the b'nei ha'ir are going to be responsible to send another machatzis hashekel, so then the b'nei ha'ir are suing the shluchim, the shomer chinam, and the shomer chinam takes a shvua, again, b'nei ha'ir shoklan acherim tachtein, and the b'nei ha'ir, they're going to have to send another shekel because of the one that was lost. Nimtzuo shechzirim haganovim. Now let's say it happens to be that they either found the lost shkolim or the thieves return the lost shkolim. So then elu ve'elu shkolim, both the ones that they sent as replacements and the ones that were lost and now found, or the ones that were stolen and now retrieved, they're both considered shkolim. Ve'ein olim lahem l'shana haba, but they don't count. They can't count it for the next year. They can't say, well, since I gave machatzis hashekel twice, I don't want to have to give next year. They can't say that. They all count as shkolim, and they cannot count for the coming year. And Rashi says, Nimtzu koya avdu, if they found the ones that were lost, or shechzirim koya nignevu, or the ones that were stolen were returned. Elu ve'elu shkolim hem dekeven de kadosh kadosh. Once they are holy, they're considered holy. They can't no longer be machatzis hashekel. Now, in any case, the question from this Mishnah is straightforward. The question from the Mishnah is, you see over here, a shomer chinam is taking a shvua, even though we're dealing with machatzis hashekel, which is considered to be hektish. And yet we said, a shomer chinam does not take a shvua when it comes to hektish. And so the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel says, Hacha benose sachar askin. And here we're dealing not with a shomer chinam, we're dealing with a shomer sachar. Now that doesn't help so much that we're dealing with a shomer sachar. We said a shomer sachar einu mishalim, that a shomer sachar does not have to pay. So what does it mean that they are taking a shvua over here? And the Gemara explains, V'nishboin litol sacharn. What they're actually doing is they're taking a shvua because they want to get paid. This has nothing to do with the responsibility. This has to do with the fact that the shomer sachar wants to get paid. And Rashi explains, Hacha benosei sachar askin, and here we're talking with the shomer sachar. Klomar, what it means to say is, Shavua zu lowly pater mitashluminhi. The Shavua over here, the oath over here, is not to exempt from payment. The lav shomer chinam nishba al hapshia, because a shomer chinam would not swear when it comes to pshia, meaning to swear that it was not negligence. Velo nosei sachar mashalam geneva v'aveda, and also a shomer sachar does not have to pay for geneva v'aveda. That's what the Mishnah said. A shomer sachar does not pay for geneva v'aveda. Ki mas nisan, it's exactly like what our Mishnah said. Ushavua zu, so why are they taking an oath over here? Because again, it was stolen and lost, and they don't have to pay, we're saying. They're taking a shvua kadei litol schar, because they want to be able to take their wages, they want to get paid for watching the item. Nishboin she'enan b'reshusan, they swear that they don't have the item in their possession. V'govin scharan min b'nei ha'ir, and then they're able to get paid from the people of the city. Well, the kamei parach, now Rashi says further on, the Gemara is going to ask, v'hakevan d'shomer sachar yesh olav l'shomer mi'gneva v'aveda. If this individual was a shomer sachar, so what was he getting paid for? He was getting paid to watch it, that it doesn't get stolen or lost. Now, even if you're saying he's not responsible if it's stolen or lost, he still shouldn't get paid if it gets stolen or lost. Velo shamar, he didn't really watch it like he was supposed to. Lo hishlam avodah, so he didn't do what he was hired to do. Ein lo litol schar, so he shouldn't be taking money anyway. So what does this even mean, that they're taking an oath in order to collect their wages? Why should they collect their wages if it was stolen or lost? That the Gemara is going to ask. In any case, the Gemara continues, Yihachi, if so, it still doesn't make sense, because if they're swearing, if they're taking the oath in order to collect their wages, nishboin legizbarn, why would they ever swear to the gizbar? It said that if they took the money from the chamber of the Beis HaMikdash in order to start supplying the public karbanos, so then already it's the responsibility of the Beis HaMikdash, it's the loss of the Beis HaMikdash, and the oath has to be to the Beis HaMikdash, to the gizbar, to the treasurer. That doesn't make sense. Here they're taking an oath in order to get paid. They should be taking the oath to the people that are going to pay them. Lifnei ho'ir mi boile, it should have said that they're taking the oath to the people of the city. So that's not a good answer. And so the Gemara says, you're right, Amar Rabba says, Nishboin livnei ho'ir. It actually does mean that they take the oath to the people of the city. However, b'maimud gizbarn, however, they do it in front of the gizbar, because there is a level of responsibility to the treasurer of the Beis HaMikdash. Why? Because they don't want to be suspected that they're lying. V'inami or they don't want to be called that they were negligent. So that's why they're doing it b'maimud. They're doing it essentially in front of the gizbarin. And Rashi explains, Nishboim la gizbarim bitmiya. Why are they swearing to the gizbar? V'halo ein schar ela al b'nei ha'ir. They're getting paid by the people of the city. And so the Gemara answered, Nishboim levnei ha'ir litol schar, and they are taking the oath to the people of the city to get their wages. However, uvemaimad hagizbarim, however, in the case where they already took the money from the chamber of the Beis HaMikdash, so now the loss really was to hektish, because the b'nei ha'ir don't need to supply a new shekel. So since the mipnei shahefsed ala hektish, since the loss was to hektish, they should take this oath in front of the gizbar as well, because that way they won't be suspected, again, since there was a loss to the Beis HaMikdash, but the real purpose of the oath is to get their wages from the b'nei ha'ir. But the Gemara continues, but again, the case in the Mishnah was that the machatzis hashekel, the shkolim, they were stolen or they were lost, and this is the question Rashi already alluded to. V'shomer sachar b'gneva v'aveda chiyuv mechayiv. In general, a shomer sachar is chayiv for gneva v'aveda. V'hachanami nihid d'shalumein lo meshalmi. And now, even over here, if you're going to say that they don't have to pay, because we're saying by hektish a shomer sachar doesn't have to pay for gneva v'aveda, but igrayu miyol lifsid, but they should at least lose out on their wages. What are they getting wages for? And Rashi explains, granted that hektish, you don't have payment of shomrim, so fine, they don't have to pay for the Geneva v'aveda, but they should lose out on their wages. The whole point is that they were hired over here to watch it from Geneva v'aveda. That's what they're getting paid for. They didn't do the work that they were hired for. And so the Gemara answers to that. Rabba says, Nignevu, what it means in the Mishnah when it says that the shkolim were stolen, it actually doesn't mean typical stolen. It means ballistim mizuyin. It was stolen by armed robbers. And avdu, what does it mean? It was lost. Shetavas finaso bayam. It means that the ship, it sunk in the sea. And so therefore, in these kinds of situations, that would be considered an onus. That wouldn't be considered a typical situation of lost. And so therefore, really, they did watch it. They did watch over it in the proper fashion, and that's why they are demanding their wages. And Rashi says, Ballistim mizuyin, the onus who listim mizuyin, armed robbers, is considered an accident. But l'shmir zulo kiblu aleim, they didn't accept upon themselves to watch it at that level. And the Gemara continues with another answer entirely. Rabbi Yochanan says, Ha mani Rabbi Shimoni. Who's the author over here in this Mishnah in Shkolim? Again, the initial question from the Mishnah in Shkolim is you seem to have a typical situation of a shomer, let's say a shomer chinam, taking an oath, and we're talking about kachim. Why are you taking an oath on kachim? We thought that a shomer chinam doesn't swear when it comes to kachim. And so now Rabbi Yochanan is answering, actually, this Mishnah in Shkolim follows the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon holds that if you have kachim, if you have any kinds of kachim where the owner is responsible, he has to make up the loss. Let's say the item gets lost, etc. So the halach is there. It's really considered that it belongs to the owner. It's not considered to be kachim, and therefore the halach is there is a din of ona'ah, there's a din of exploitation, and there's also shvuah in that situation, and that's what we're talking about over here. And Rashi explains, Hamani Rabbi Shimon he Mesechet Shvuos. This is Rabbi Shimon in Mesechet Shvuos. Yesh lehen onah. There is onah bichdi garas la. Rashi just says there's no reason to really have this text in the Gemara. We're not talking about onah here. Uman de garas la lo yad sham Rabbi Shimon behedya lagabe shvuah. The person who does have that text doesn't realize. Whoever put in that text into our Gemara did not realize that Rabbi Shimon said this specifically by Shvuah. So there was a text in our Gemara that you're learning from the Mishnah by Onah, you're learning it to Shvuah. But the truth is that there's a Mishnah explicitly by Shvuah in any case. But in any case, that's the Gemara's answer. We're talking here according to Rabbi Shimon. It's therefore, in this case, Kachim Shechaya B'Acharayusan, and that's why Nishboin Alei, and that's why there's an oath. But the Gemara says that only half answers the question. That makes sense before they took the money from the chamber of the Beis HaMikdash. So at that point in time, it's the responsibility of the owner to make up for anything that happens to the shkolim. That's chayiv b'acharayusan. So there's a shvuah. But mishanisrma hatruma. But once already they took the money from the chamber of the Beis HaMikdash, kachim she'eno chayiv b'acharayusan. And at that point in time, the owners are not responsible. And we know that, as we mentioned earlier. Now the Gemara brings the brayso, the Tanya, as we learned in the brayso. Tormen al ha'avod ve'al ha'gavoy ve'al ha'asad legavos. When they take the money from the chamber of the Beis HaMikdash, that includes anything that was lost, anything that was collected, anything that in the future is going to be collected. Meaning, at that point in time, it's the responsibility of the Beis HaMikdash. It's not the responsibility of the owners, and so therefore this will not fully answer the question. Why is the shomer taking a shvuah in a situation where there is no chiyuv achrayus? And the Gemara says, rather Rabbi Elazar says another answer, Shavua Zut HaKonas Chachamim. What's happening over here is you're right. On a Doraisa level, there is no need for a Shavua. However, the Chachamim said, nevertheless, even though it's a case of Hektish, where no Shavua is required, nevertheless, the Chachamim want the person to take a Shavua. Shalo Yehu B'nei Adam is Zalzlan Bekteshos. That way, people will not treat Hektish with contempt. Meaning, they're not going to say, oh, Hektish, you don't even need to worry about it. There's no need to even take a Shavua if you're a Shomer by Hektish. People will look down upon Hektish. In order to prevent that, the Chachamim say that the Shomer should take a Shvuah. And Rashi explains, Shechaya b'achrayas, again, any kind of kachim where there's a chiyav achrayas, there's a responsibility of the owner, meaning shahamafkid chaya b'achrayas, meaning the person who's giving the deposit, he's chayav, he takes responsibility, hilkach kedidei dami, therefore it's like it's his, l'Rebbe Shimon, according to Rebbe Shimon. V'achanami, chayav and kol b'nei oyer l'shkol achem tachtein. Here also, the people of the city are responsible to provide other shkolim in case the shkolim get lost, etc. Tormen al ha'avid, but then we said that once already they take the money from the chamber of the Beis HaMikdash, meaning at that point they're taking the money for the purpose of providing the funding for the public karbanos, so then that even includes anything that was lost. It means as follows. They had these 3 boxes, 3 containers, and they would fill them up from the money that was in the chamber. V'hi truma, and that was called the truma, that's what it means, tormin. That was called the truma likach mikesef hakupos, and they would take from those boxes called karbanos sibur. That's how they would pay for all the karbanos, the public karbanos. V'tormanos san al manashu shalosh kupos roshu truma lashirayim, and the idea was that these boxes are the first part that's separated for whatever is left over in the chambers. Shayu osan shayiviu shkolim hanesharim belishka zochim betrumas hakupa. That way, anybody who brings shkolim, leftover shkolim in the chamber, they're going to be included in the trumas hakupa. Whatever was taken from the container goes on everybody. It's shared by everyone. Lios hakarbanos gam aleim, the public karbanos include them as well. And that includes them, even though, let's say, the person sent his shekel and it was lost and he doesn't even realize. Again, it was collected, it's still on the road. And not only that, even on those in the future that would be collected, meaning, let's say somebody, there was an accident, he wasn't able to send his shekel in Adar, he would send it the whole year, and he would put it into a shofar, essentially into a container, that it said on there was the new shkolim, and they would actually take take from the chamber, they would take this Trumas Halishka, they would take 3 times in the year. Bepros Pesach, Uvefros Atzeres, Uvefros Chag at the approach of Pesach, and Shavuos, and the time of Sukkot as well. And when that time came, any money that was in the shofar, they put into the chamber. V'torman, and again, they took a portion of it to put into the kupos. Truma Rishona Masan Afalo Asad Ligvos. When they did the first one, they made a condition even on whatever in the future is going to come in. V'gam Vishniyav Uveshlishis, the same on the second and the third. V'hamevi Achar Shenisrama Hashlishis. Now, if a person brought in so late that it was even after the third one, after they took from the third time, Nosno L'Shofar Shashmo Tiklan Atik, and that person would actually put it into a shofar, which it said on it the name was the old shekels. V'nofa L'Shire Halishka, that would fall to what was called the remnants of the lishka. Umehen Boyin Chomas Oir Migdalo said they used that money for the walls of the city and for that kind of construction. And then the Gemara said, then finally Rabbi Elazar said, no, really the shvu over here in this Mishnah is to exempt the shomer chinam from paying. Over shomer chinam, when we're talking about a shomer chinam, with the kashalach masnisin doraisa pater lagamri, and your question from the Mishnah, you're right, on a doraisa level is completely pater. He is exempt because it's hektish. This is just the Rabbanan who said that you have to take a shvua, because again, we don't want the person to look, in terms of watching hektish, to look at that with contempt. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, no, say Sachar Einu Meshalim, that a Shomer Sachar again doesn't pay. According to Rashi, doesn't pay for Geneva via Veda when we're talking about Hektish. And the Gemara says, Rami lei Rav Yosef Bar Chama l'Rabba. Rav Yosef Bar Chama had the following contradiction for Rabba. Tanan, it said in our Mishnah, no say Sachar Einu Meshalim, that a Shomer Sachar doesn't pay. Uramini, we have the following contradiction. The Brisa says, and this is in reference to the Parah Aduma, we'll see Rashi in a moment, Hasocher Sapol, if somebody hires a worker, Lishmor Sapar to watch the parah, to watch the cow, Lishmor Satinok to watch the child, Lishmor Sazroim to watch the seeds, a Nosn Lo Schar Shabbos. You don't pay him for Shabbos, you don't pay him for the work he does on Shabbos, Lefigach Ein Achrayas Shabbos Olav, therefore he's not responsible for what happens on Shabbos. Hayas Schir Shabbos, Schir Chodesh, Schir Shana, Schir Shavua. Now let's say he was hired for a whole week, or he was hired for a whole month, or a whole year, or a whole Shemitah cycle. So then, nos and lo schar Shabbos, then he is paid essentially for the work he does on Shabbos. Lefikach achrayas Shabbos olav. Therefore, the responsibility of Shabbos is upon him. And so over here, it seems to be, again, we were saying that a nosei sachar is not responsible when it comes to hektish. This is something that's in the category of hektish, and apparently he is responsible. And so the Gemara says, my lav isn't not l'shalim, isn't he responsible to pay? And that seems to be a contradiction to our Mishnah. And the Gemara says, lo, no, lahafsid sachar. What it means to say is he's responsible in terms of losing his wages. He's not going to get paid if he doesn't watch properly. The Gemara then says, if so, reisha de katani, but in the reisha where it says, ein achrayas Shabbos olav, that he's not responsible in terms of Shabbos, meaning you're not paying him for Shabbos. Hachinami del hafsid schar. Are you talking about the fact that he loses out on his wages? There is no wages. Umiyas le schar Shabbos. Are there any wages on Shabbos anyway? V'alkatani ein nos and lo schar Shabbos. It already says that you're not going to pay him for Shabbos, and so therefore we're still back to a question. It sounds like he is responsible, even though we're talking about hektish over here. And the Gemara says, Ishtik, he was silent in terms of this question. Amar le said to him, Midi shmiel lach. Did you hear anything about this? Do you have any answer for this question? Amar le said to him, Hachi Amar Rav Sheshes. This is what Rav Sheshes said. B'shekanu miyadu. They do a specific kinyan in which he takes responsibility. That's already an exception. In that case, he would be responsible. V'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan b'shekanu miyadu. Rabbi Yochanan says the same answer, that again there was a specific kinyan for this purpose. And Rashi explains, Hasocher Sapolam, he hires workers. This is talking about Gizbar Shel Hektish. It's talking about the treasurer of the Beis HaMikdash, Shesachar Poalam Shel Hektish. He's using Hektish's money to hire workers. Lishmor Asapara, to watch the Para Aduma we're talking about. Shalakachua Vishomer no Soshaloti Pasal Balias Olo Bamum. They would watch the Para Aduma because there were various ways that the Para Aduma could be disqualified, either that you put a yoke upon it or it has a blemish. And so this person is essentially a paid watchman to make sure that doesn't happen. And furthermore, Lishmor Asatinokos, to watch the children. Lo yitmu, that refers to the fact that we're watching the children, that they shouldn't become tamei. Shayu megadlin osan lepara bechatzeros habenuyos besloim v'tachtei and cholol. They would raise them specifically for the para aduma. They were in courtyards where there was no tumah at all. Kedaminan besukah b'hayashin tachasamita. That's all described in Mesechet Sukkah. Lefishasu ma'ala bekoin hasore fesapara shetei prishasu betara, because they would make a special stringency by the Kohen who burned the para aduma that he would have to be separated, be pure. Ve'inechava kohanim no Nogan Bo Kal Shivis, the other Kohanim wouldn't touch him for 7 days. Kedamina B'Seder Yuma, like we say in Yuma. Vatinokas Halolo Shalo Nitzmu Me'olam, and then these children who were never tamei their whole lives, Memalim Mayim Lemekachin, they would fill up the water, Umazan all of Kal Shiva, they would sprinkle him in the 7 days. Velishmoras Hazuram, the other thing he's watching is the seeds. That means Sada HaMevakeres Uzruah Lo Omer Kodem LePesach Shivim Yom. This is talking about you have a field that's planted for the purposes of the Omer. It's 70 days before Pesach. Kedamina B'Menachas, that we say Menachas. Inami B'Shvias Svichim La'omer Shtei Alechem. Or you could be talking about during the Shemitah year, so you have just kind of growth in the fields. That's for the Omer and the Shtei Halechem. This was another kind of Shmirah. All of these kinds of Shmiras, you're hiring someone, it has to do with Hektish. So the halacha was, Ein Nosen Lo Schar Shabbos. Number one, if you're paying him daily, you don't pay him for Shabbos, im Schir Yomu, if he's paid per day, because you don't pay someone to work on Shabbos. Lefikach Ein Achrayas Shabbos Olav, and therefore he's not responsible for what happens on Shabbos. Im Yira Behen Kilkel B'Shabbos, Ein Chayv L'Shalom. If something should go wrong on Shabbos, he's not chayv to pay. However, if he's hired for longer periods of time, Schir Shabbos Shavua, meaning he's hired, let's say, for a week, or Schir Shavua, he's hired for Shavua, means Shemitah Shlema, for a full Shemitah cycle, then Nosen Lo Schar Shabbos, then already he is being paid for Shabbos. Shenivla B'Schar Shar Hayamim, it's already absorbed in the payment for all the other days. Ve'eno Mefurish LaShabbos, is not as long as the pay is not explicit for Shabbos, it's not a problem. And so in any case, the Gemara's question was, don't you see here a level of responsibility of a Shomer Sacher when it comes to Hektish? And the Gemara's ultimate answer was, B'Shekanu Miyadu, there's actually a specific kinyan that was made, Shem Yekalkel Shmi Rasu Yishalim, he made a specific kinyan that if he doesn't do what he's supposed to do, he's going to pay. Havada Yishalim, in that situation, he certainly will pay. Sharei Horid Atzma Lakach V'Shiba Nechasav, the person essentially specially designated himself to be responsible, put a shibud lien on his property for that purpose, so that would be an exception that everybody agrees to, and that's why it's not a question on our Mishnah. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Kachim Shechai B'Achrayus and Yesh Lehen Onah. If you have Kachim, but the owner has responsibility, that's considered already the owner's. So there is the law of Onah, of exploitation. V'She'eno Chai B'Achrayus, and if the owner is not responsible, Ein Lehen Onah, there is no Onah. The Gemara says, Tani Tana Kamei de Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba. The Tana taught before Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba, Kachim Shechai B'Achrayus, and if you have Kachim that the owner is responsible for, so Chayiv, then you're Chayiv. We're talking here about a carbon shvua. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Shani Korei Behen B'Hashem V'Kichesh, because that's called, there's a denial B'Hashem. Now that already doesn't make any sense, because we're talking about the fact that it's not Hashem. We're talking about Chayiv B'Achrayusan, that the person is responsible, and yet we're quoting the pasuk of B'Hashem V'Kichesh, V'She'eno Chayiv B'Achrayusan, and then if the owner is not responsible, so then Pater, then he's Pater, Shani Korei Behen Ba'amiso V'Kichesh, because that's called with his friend V'Kichesh, meaning with the other person, as opposed to Hashem. Again, this doesn't make sense either, because if it's Eno Chayiv B'Achrayusan, it should be more like Hashem, not like Amiso, and so that's why the Gemara immediately says, Amar Le, he said to him, Klape Laya, what direction are you going over here? Everything you're saying here is backwards. And Rashi explains, Tani Tana Linyan Shvuas HaPikadon Asham Gezelos. We're talking here again about Shvuas HaPikadon by Asham Gezelos. Means to say that the person is taking a Shavua, it turns out that it was a false Shavua, and then he admits it's with regards to a Pikadon. So you're usually going to bring this carbon Shavua, this Asham Gezelos. So Kachim Shabaylam Chayavin Ba'Achrayusan. So a case could be like this. Let's say you have a carbon, and the owners are responsible for Achrayas. Kagon Da'amar Harei Olai. Let's say the owner said, I'm taking upon myself responsibility to bring a carbon. He then designates a specific animal. Something happens to that animal. He's responsible to bring another animal. That's a situation where the Bailam are Chayav B'Achrayas. So then what happened was, V'Frishan, he separated the animal, V'Fkidan Lazen, he gave the animal to this person to watch over, and there's a Chayav Achrayas, V'Kafar, V'Nishba, V'Hoda, and then the person watching over it denied it, took a false oath, admitted that he lied, Chayav Karban Shvua, is Chayav a Karban Shvua. Now that makes sense, because we're talking about his Chayav B'Achrayas, it's the owner's. Since the owner has responsibility, it's not like typical Kachim. The problem is the next line, Shani Kori B'Hen B'Hashem V'Kichesh, because that's called B'Hashem. Kasal Kadaitach, right now the Gemara thinks, Tam D'Chiyuva, Mishum Dehein Shal Gavoa. The reason why the guy is Chayev is because it belongs to God. It belongs to the Almighty, Karin and Buhu, V'Umal Mal B'Hashem V'Kichesh. It's called Mal B'Hashem V'Kichesh. That's how we think right now. V'She'enon Chayav and Habaylam B'Achrayus and Pater. And if the Bailam are not Chayav and Achrayus, so then you're Pater. Again, that makes sense, but the pasuk recording doesn't. Hanishba, the person is Pater, the one who takes the oath. Shani Kori B'Hen Ba'amiso V'Kichesh. That's called Ba'amiso. That has to deal with another person. Memnei Shem Kruyin Shal Amiso. That's called Amiso. That's by something with his neighbor, with the person from his nation. With the Amiso Pater Devinan Ba'Hashem. And you're Pater there because it needs to be specifically Ba'Hashem. And that's why the Gemara immediately says Klape Laya, Klape Hechon Adavar Nota. Which direction are you going over here? It doesn't make sense. Actually, the exact opposite seems to be more logical. and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Ches Amud Beis.